Okay, everyone, I think we might get started. So welcome to today's SNEV session. So I'm Natalie Turner from the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia, and I'm joined by Sarah Vega, a postdoc working under Associate Professor Shannon Stott at MGH Harvard Medical School, and also SNEV President. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Andy Hill today, who's here to discuss the process of publishing in the ICEV journals, what to think about when submitting your work to one of these journals, and what the editorial board might be looking for when considering manuscripts for publication. So Professor Hill is best known for his work in neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and prion diseases, and of course, extracellular vesicles. So Andy is currently the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Impact at Victoria University in Melbourne, Australia. Before Victoria University, Professor Hill held several leadership roles at La Trobe University. He was the Associate Provost Research and Industry Engagement for Science, Health and Engineering, and responsible for the strategic leadership of research and developing partnerships and increasing research productivity. He has also been director of the La Trobe Institute for Molecular Science and head of the Department of Biochemistry and Genetics. During that time, he established the La Trobe Research Centre for the Study of Extracellular Vesicles and was its inaugural director. So some of his career accomplishments include attracting more than $52 million in research funding as a chief investigator, an H-index of 90, over 45,000 citations of his work, and over 200 publications. Andy is a past president of ICEV from 2016 to 2020. From 2013, he served as associate editor for the Journal of Extracellular Vesicles. From 2021, he became editor-in-chief of Journal of Extracellular Biology, and he's published his own work in journals such as the Journal of Extracellular Vesicles, Journal of Extracellular Biology, Nature Reviews Methods of Primers, Nature Metabolism, to name a few. And he's also contributed to the recommendations for reproducibility of cerebrospinal fluid extracellular vesicle studies, which was published in January of this year. So without further ado, I would like to invite you to share your screen, Andy, and we can get started.
Sure. Okay, can you see my screen okay?
Yep, perfect.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the invitation to come and present today, and thanks, Natalie, for that lovely introduction. And I'm going to present around publishing in the two ICEV journals, Journal of Extracellular Vesicles, otherwise known as JEV, and the Journal of Extracellular Biology, which we've abbreviated JEX-Bio. And I'm, as Natalie said, I'm based at Victoria University in Melbourne, Australia. And I've been an associate editor of JEV for about 10 years. And as Natalie mentioned, I took up the role of editor-in-chief for JEX-Bio when it was launched towards the end of 2021. So I'm going to give, this is an outline of the presentation today. So I'm going to give a bit of an introduction to the journals, talk about JEV first, then talk about JEX-Bio, a little bit about open access publishing, and also cover a little bit about reviewing for the journals as well. That's a way that you can get involved. But I wanted to spend a fair bit of time giving you the opportunity to ask me some questions about publishing, the role as an editor, the journals, etc. So as we all know, that the field of extracellular vesicles has been growing exponentially for several years now. And this is a graph showing the number of new publications in the field since the first description of exosome biogenesis by Rose Johnston in the late 1980s. And we can see that over the last few years, there's been about 6,000 new publications in the field published each year. And we're not sure if this is going to be a plateau or whether we're going to see an increase, but that's quite a number of publications in this particular research area. And as you'll probably know, ICEV was founded in 2011, and at the same time, the Journal of Extracellular Vesicles was also established. And this was the first journal that was brought out by the International Society for Extracellular Vesicles, or ICEV. And the journal grew quite significantly over the decade. and it included the publication of the first MySEP guidelines in 2014, which was followed up by their updating in 2018, and more recently, as of a couple of weeks ago, the MySEP 2023 guidelines. And as you know, those guidelines have really grown with size and are now a very big community project to create a consensus document for guidelines around this researching in extracellular vesicles. And so as the journal was growing, it became clear that there was space for another journal, not just to focus on extracellular vesicles, but to start to look at other areas of the extracellular space. And so the ICEP board had several discussions and launched the Journal of Extracellular Biology in October 2021. And we published our first paper in JEX Bio in March 2022, and I'll give you a bit of data showing how the journal's grown since then. So just to talk through the two journals we're going to cover today, the first is the Journal of Extracellular Vesicles, which was established in 2012. And this is an EV-centric journal that publishes high-impact research in the field of extracellular vesicles. And you can see now the articles that are published in JEV are of a very high quality. So this is a high-impact journal. And the Journal of Extracellular Biology has a slightly broader remit. It publishes articles not just on EVs, but also other aspects of extracellular biology. And this publishes great quality research in the field of extracellular biology. They're both ICEP journals, and they're both published by the publisher Wiley. So if you go to the Wiley website, you can see links to both of our journals on there. So just to start with, I'll give a bit of an introduction to JEV. JEV publishes work relating to all areas of extracellular vesicles. I'll come back to this in a moment to talk about what the editors are looking for in terms of papers suitable for JEV. And publications in JEV cover all types of EVs, including microvesicles, exosomes, ectosomes, apoptotic bodies, as well as synthetic EVs. So whatever nomenclature you're using, if it's an extracellular vesicle, it's of potential interest for JEV. And the journal provides an exchange of data, ideas, and information on all aspects of extracellular vesicles, including the chemistry, biology, applications of using EVs, and also including clinical use. And this is something that the journal is particularly interested in, is in publishing clinical studies related to applications of EVs. Even if they're negative studies, it's still really useful information to get out there. So the journal is looking towards publishing some of those clinical studies. So being journals, they're covered by several different metrics, and these are some of the latest metrics for JEV. Different companies have different ways of measuring the impact and citations of journals. And in 2022, JEV had a CITE score of 23.9, which is a pretty high CITE score, and especially in the field of cell biology. It has a journal impact factor, which is measured by Clarivate, of 16. So it's still got a very double-digit impact factor. In 2023, the number of full-text views of articles in JEV was just under 750,000. So that's a really significant number of views of different articles in JEV. And this also underlies why ICEP decided to publish both of its journals as gold open access journals. So you don't need to subscribe to the journal to be able to view the content. So measuring the views is a great way of seeing how much impact particular articles have had, and that anyone around the world, whether you belong to a university or not, can access the articles that have been published. In terms of the editorial aspects of JEV, in 2023, the acceptance rate was about 15%. It's been about that for several years now. And the time from submission to the first decision is about a week, 7 days. And from submission to acceptance, which includes revisions to manuscripts, the average is around 170 days. So it's quite a long process to get published in JEV. However, the submission to first decision is very quick. The reason it's quick is that the journal editors, the editor-in-chief, Jan Lotvall, and his deputy editors screen papers to see whether they really fit the brief for publication in JEV. And so quite a few papers undergo what's called desk rejection. It sounds like a really horrible term, but it's where if the editors-in-chief and the deputy editors feel that the article either isn't going to survive peer review or doesn't quite fit the brief of the journal, the paper is rejected quickly so the authors can then move on and submit their article somewhere else. So JEV has an editorial board which is headed by the editor-in-chief, Jan Lockvold, who was previous president of ICEV, the first president of ICEV, who's based in Sweden. And he's supported by an executive scientific editor, Sarah Williams, who's actually employed by ICEV, and she works for both JEV and JexBio. And the editor-in-chief is supported by 5 deputy editors, who include Arne Hendricks from Belgium, Simon Powers from Scotland, Michael Freeman from the USA, Hubert Yin from China, and Esther Nolte-Hoorn from the Netherlands. And so the deputy editors play a really key role in managing the papers that are submitted to JEV. And in particular, they assign these papers to one of over 25 associate editors who manage the peer review process for the papers. And I'll talk through about that process in a moment because it's the same for JexBio. So as we can see, there's a team of over 30 who are involved on the editorial board of JEV. And so it's quite a large operation. I think there's about 800 submissions to JEV every year. So there's a number of papers being submitted every day that get handled by this team. The Journal of Extracellular Biology was launched in October 2021, and it has a much broader remit than JEV. So it publishes what we like to think of as great quality research in extracellular biology. So it doesn't necessarily have to involve extracellular vesicles. So we publish open access research on EVs, but also extracellular particles, how they interact with each other, how they interact with other extracellular molecules, the extracellular matrix, cells, and organs. So it's a much broader scope than JEV. And JexBio provides an opportunity to share great research, which can be EV related, but not necessarily EV centric. And this is one of the key differences between JexBio and JEV. It doesn't have to be EV centric to be published in JexBio. So here are some key points about JEV, and Jan and Sarah provided some of this information to share with you today about the key points for getting articles published in JEV. So the first is that all of the work should be EV specific or centric, making it of interest to a broad variety of EV researchers. So this is a really key point, that your paper should have broad interest to the whole EV field, not just to those studying EVs in your particular disease or model system. So by saying this, it doesn't mean that JEV's not interested in work on specific diseases, but the work has to be presented in a way that makes it interesting and accessible to a broad range of EV researchers. And I think that's also reflected in things like the number of article views and also the impact factor. The work is being picked up and cited by a large number of people. So it's got a very broad appeal. JEV is currently particularly interested in work on EV engineering, and as I mentioned, also clinical trials and clinical data, and also that the outcomes don't have to be positive. Getting this data out there is really important for the field. So if you have papers around EV engineering and clinical trials and or clinical data, JEV will be interested in having a look at them. To publish in JEV, the editors need to be convinced that the work is actually on EVs, and therefore the choice of methodology is important. So what doesn't tend to go far in JEV is work that mainly use kits to isolate EVs alone, unless you're showing you're getting EVs out of those kits. And also that the editors don't consider ultracentrifugation alone sufficient for separating EVs from other particles, such as lipoprotein particles and things such as plasma and serum. So there's some key methodologies there that you need to consider if you're interested in submitting your paper to JEV. Also, when presenting mechanisms, it's the molecule or molecules within the EVs that are of most interest to GEV, not just what happens in the cells when you incubate them with EV. So again, it's bringing that EV-centric approach to papers that get published in GEV. And actually for both journals, we like you to use titles that are informative and avoid acronyms. Even using the word EV in the title, we prefer you to use extracellular vesicle, because EVs can mean things like electric vehicles. So you need to really spell out and avoid acronyms in the title of your papers and make them informative. And perhaps tied into this point here, the EV characterization is really important. We have things like the MySEV guidelines. Remember, they are guidelines, they're not rules, they're guidelines. That the characterization is important, and that the editors and also the reviewers need to be convinced that the work is actually on EVs. And this also relates to the point about using kits alone. And if you're unsure about whether your paper is suitable for GEV, you can actually send an email to the editor-in-chief using this email address here, and they welcome pre-submission inquiries. So what's quite useful is to send a quick email with the title of your paper, perhaps even the abstract, and suggest why you think it's suitable for GEV. And if the editors think it's suitable, at least for a first glance, that they'll let you know either way, whether you should consider submitting it or not. So a pre-submission inquiry is actually sometimes a good thing to do if you're not sure about whether your manuscript fits the brief for the journal. In terms of GEX Bio, as you heard, I'm the editor-in-chief for the journal, and I work alongside two deputy editors, so Juan Falcon Perez from Spain and Min Lee from Singapore. And very similar setup to GEV, we have a team of about 15 associate editors, and so the papers cascade from myself down to the deputy editors, who then recruit associate editors to handle the review process. GEX Bio, as is GEV, is a gold open access journal. So it means that the final published version of your article is permanently and freely available online for anyone, anywhere to read. And that's really important, especially for a growing field where it's really important to get our information out there. GEX Bio, as I mentioned, we published our first paper in March 2022. And we published 39 articles in our first year, which got more than 32,000 views. Last year, we published 50 articles with more than 80,000 views. And so far to date, we've published 11 articles with 12,000 views so far this year. So we can see that the journal's is actually growing quite significantly at the moment. One issue with a new journal is that it doesn't immediately start to be indexed in things like PubMed and Scopus. And you have to wait for a while until you've had a regular publication output from the journal before you can start to be indexed by PubMed, Scopus, and Clarivate. So towards the end of last year, we felt we were ready to apply for listing on PubMed. So we made that application. We're currently waiting to hear the outcome of that. If your work has been published using research funding from the NIH, it's automatically added to PubMed Central. So you can find some GEX Bio articles actually in PubMed being submitted via that route, but we're hoping to be listed with PubMed later this year, and all articles being published in GEX Bio will be available through PubMed. And similarly, you need more than 2 years of publications, regular publication output for a journal before applying for Scopus indexing. So obviously March 2024, we're getting to that 2-year period. So later this year, we'll be applying to get indexed in Scopus. And this is really important because for students, for instance, there are some universities that mandate the journals where you publish your research needs to be indexed in PubMed or Scopus so it can be found easily. So we really recognise how important this indexing is for students and other researchers where those restrictions apply. But also being indexed also gets us into the metrics game as well, where we will be able to track our citations, how many people are citing and reading the work as well through things like Scopus and Clarivate. So just some journal metrics for GEX Bio. So as I mentioned, 2023, we had just over 80,000 views, which we're really really pleased with. And compared with GEV, where the acceptance rate last year was 15%, the acceptance rate for GEX Bio is currently just over 70%. So we're rejecting about 27% of papers, and we think the quality of papers being published in GEX Bio is actually really high. The papers we're rejecting, the quality isn't what we think is of standard for the journal. So the acceptance rate is higher than GEV, but still there are a number of papers that don't pass through successfully through the review process. Last year, the submission to first decision period was 36 days. And this is different to GEV, where it was 7 days, because we don't have, we're not currently vetoing papers at that editorial stage. If we think the manuscript fits the scope and is by viewing it by the editors of sufficient quality, it gets sent out to review. And so this period is really from the time we receive the paper to when it gets its first review. And we try and get those reviews back and the decisions to authors within about a month. We think that's a time period that we really try and aim for. And the time from submission, the first time you submit the paper to when it's finally accepted, is about 133 days. So it's a little bit shorter than GEV. And most papers that we look at undergo 1 or 2 revisions before they're finally accepted. So how do you make the choice of whether to submit to GEV or GEX Bio? So I've talked a bit about the brief of either journal, what they're looking for. So you have to decide which journal is appropriate for your manuscript. Also go to the journal website. There's a lot of information on the website that you can find about the journal, what they're looking for, the types of articles. I'll cover that in a moment. But also think about your cover letter, because this is your opportunity to tell the editors about your paper and why you think it is suitable for their journal. So your cover letter should concisely outline the main points of your manuscript, and also, as I mentioned, say why you think it's relevant for consideration by the particular journal. Also, as another tip, it's quite good to suggest appropriate reviewers, people who might be able to review your manuscript in an unbiased way. So obviously don't pick your friends or family on these names, but consider people who are in your field, who are at arm's length from your research, who could give an appropriate review of your work. There's no guarantee that the editors will use these names, but sometimes it's quite helpful, particularly if your paper is in an area where it can be hard to find reviewers, to have some suggestions so that we can approach those people if necessary. The manuscripts, when they're received by the journal, are first screened by the editorial team first. So the editor-in-chief takes a look at them, then passes them on to the deputy editors, who will then, if they're going to go out for review, pass them on to the associate editors. And so, particularly for GEV, the first decision is whether to send it out to review and do that desk reject, or if the paper is desk rejected from GEV, one thing that they can do is offer a transfer, and that's where the manuscript can be transferred from GEV into GEX Bio. The authors have to agree with this, but if there's any review comments that go along with your paper, they'll get transferred to GEX Bio as well, and that can really help us in making a more speedy decision about your manuscript. With both journals, we aim to return the first reviews in a timely fashion. There's nothing more frustrating than waiting months and months to hear the reviewers' comments about your paper. And in terms of GEX Bio and also for GEV, we publish a number of review articles, and if you look at the instructions to authors on both websites, we say that review articles are actually commissioned. And what we like to do is to try and hear from potential authors about new ideas for review articles. And for GEX Bio, I really welcome people to email in ideas they have for review articles. So feel free to approach the editors if you have an idea for a review article. And in particular, we're looking for review articles on new topics or new ways of thinking about EVs and extracellular particles. As you all know, there's many review articles published every year on EVs. A lot of them sort of tend to have the same figure 1. showing biogenesis. What we're looking for are things that go a bit beyond that, that might be of great interest to researchers in this field and also other fields. And as I mentioned with JexBio, it's still a young journal, and it takes time to build and become indexed, but we think that, you know, we've got a regular number of articles being submitted and published, so we think this is really growing at the moment. So this slide just lists the different article types that both JEV on the left and JexBio publish. So both publish original research articles, review articles, short communications. These are papers that usually have sort of 2 or 3 figures, so they're much shorter than an original research article. For JexBio, we also welcome technical reports. We haven't really published any practice and policy documents, but we've got quite a wide variety of different article types. Perspectives articles are something that we're keen to publish as well. We've published a couple where people are discussing articles that have been published in the literature. So that's something, if you're interested in working on, you can approach us about. Also with JEV and JexBio, we publish things called ICEV position papers, and these are papers that have been pretty much commissioned by ICEV around a particular topic, and I'll give you a list of those in a minute, but things like the MyCEV guidelines fit that criteria as well. And so here's a list of the many ICEV position papers that have been published over the years. So we started, the first 2 came out in 2013. And this actually was born out of a workshop on extracellular vesicle RNA that was held in New York in 2012. And so you can see there's a wide variety of different position papers that have been published, also including the MyCEV guidelines, first published in 2014, in 2018, and recently a couple of weeks ago. So now I'll just talk a little bit about what happens to your manuscript when you press the submit button. Wiley uses the Scholar One system, and there's a variety of different steps you have to go through in submitting your manuscript, uploading the figure files, the article files, inputting all the data about the authors, the abstract. And when you press submit, the article then goes to Wiley and gets checked by their staff for various things. They check for things like the style. They also check for conformity, and they also do checks such as if you've got figures 1 to 6 in the article and you haven't called them out in the main text, they'll come back to you and go, you haven't called out figure 3 anywhere in the text. So there are some really fundamental checks that happen with the paper when it's first submitted. So it can take several days to go through that process. Also, articles submitted to both JEV and JexBio undergo a plagiarism check. So we use Authenticate. And then when that check's been performed, the article is sent to the editor-in-chief, who looks at the Authenticate report if they need to. And then this is a decision point. Do we send the paper out to a deputy editor, or is it desk rejected? So when it's sent out to a deputy editor, the deputy editor has a look at the paper and then chooses one of the associate editors who will handle the paper, will go and recruit reviewers and conduct the review process. So the article actually goes through several people's hands, and it can take a few days for it to go from, my hands through to a deputy editor and then to an associate editor, but we try and do that in as short a time as possible. And then the associate editor chooses reviewers for the paper. We have a database of reviewers. We might look at some of the names if they've been suggested by the authors, and we go out and we invite people to review the paper. Some papers, it can take 20 or 30 invitations to find 2 or 3 reviewers. Some papers, you can invite 5 reviewers and get 5 people agreeing to do it. So sometimes it can take a while to find the right number of reviewers for your paper. And that's sometimes why you might get 2 reviews. Sometimes you might get 4 or 5 reviews. When the reviews come back from the reviewers, they go back to the associate editor who considers those. They've also read the paper, and the associate editor provides a recommendation to the deputy editor based on the reviews. And they have a quick discussion around, should we accept the paper? Is it major or minor revisions? And are there any additional comments that the editors want to make on the manuscript? And then this is crafted into the into the letter that you will receive from the journal. Prior to acceptance of the paper, the deputy editor discusses with the editor-in-chief the decision, and this is done before it's communicated to the authors. And that's why quite often you see the editor-in-chief's name on the email as well. And the various decisions that are made on the manuscript, particularly after that first submission, is around whether it's needs minor revisions, major revisions, or in the case of Jev, it might be rejected with the offer to transfer it to Jex Bio, or a flat-out reject. And if the offer is made to transfer the submission, it then moves from Jev to Jex Bio, so the authors have to agree for that transfer. It's not automatic. And if the transfer is accepted, as I've mentioned previously, all the reviews from Jev are transferred with the manuscript, so that can speed up the reviewing process at Jex Bio. And then prior to final acceptance, when we've got a manuscript that we're ready to accept, the figures go through an image check process. And so the images are checked for, it's sort of a pattern recognition process to identify any potential issues with the figures. If these are detected, we then go back to the authors and go, look, this has been spotted. Can you please take a look and come back to us with revised figures, or let us know what you think is happening. So papers go through that process before they're formally accepted. And then when the paper's formally accepted, it then gets handled by Wiley, who create the proofs, and then you correct your proofs. They will, there's a financial aspect if you have to pay the article processing charge. And so it really leaves the editorial team at that point and is handled by the publisher. Just to talk quickly about the article publication charges, most journals have these, particularly open access journals. And one benefit of being a member of ICEV is that you get a reduced article processing charge for both Jev and Jex Bio. So if we just look here at the US dollars, non-members, for Jev, it's $4,200 per article. For Jex Bio, it's cheaper at $3,100. If you're a member of ICEV, it actually drops down by about $900 for Jev and about $700 for Jex Bio. So your one-year membership of Jev can pay for ICEV, can pay for itself if you publish a paper. There are some discounts available for articles that aren't just original research articles, so technical reports, commentaries, the short communications, and the position papers carry a 50% discount on the prices here. But one thing to look out for is whether your university or institution has one of these transformation agreements. And this is where publishers have signed agreements with universities, or in the case of Australia, they signed an agreement with all of the university libraries that they have this transformation agreement. So all the university libraries pay a set fee, and it means that anyone who's a member of those libraries can get their article processing fees covered under that agreement. So essentially, you can publish your paper for free if your institution is a member of one of these agreements. So the Wiley website has information on which universities have signed up. Across the world, there's many universities now that have these agreements. So it's worth having a look, and it doesn't just cover Jev and Jex Bio, it goes by publisher. So Wiley has them, Taylor and Francis has them, Elsevier has them as well. So it's worth taking a look at this, because you could potentially publish your article for free if you're a member of a university that has one of these agreements. I thought it was just worth mentioning a little bit about artificial intelligence, particularly AI-generated content tools. I think some of you might have seen the last few days, there was an article published in a Frontiers journal that had a series of figures that were created with artificial intelligence, and they weren't picked up. Well, according to the news, that one reviewer did pick them up, but it was quite clear that they'd been generated using an AI tool. There was a picture of a rat and a biochemical pathway, lots of spelling mistakes in all the names. So I think it's worth just mentioning a little bit about the use of AI tools in publishing. And ICEV doesn't currently have its own guidelines for this. Our journals don't. But what I'm showing here are the guidelines from our publisher, Wiley. And if you're interested, you can have a look at this link below. And basically, it's saying that tools such as ChatGPT and others that are based on large language models cannot be considered capable of initiating an original piece of research without direction by human authors. And there's also COPE, which is an organisation that looks at publishing ethics. They've issued a position statement on AI tools, which you can also download. And they state that the use of tools such as ChatGPT cannot fulfill the role of, nor be listed as an author of an article. So if an author has used this kind of tool to develop any portion of a manuscript, its use must be described transparently and in detail in the methods or acknowledgement section. The article I mentioned that was in the news this week, they had actually said, we use this tool to generate the figures. So they were transparent about saying they used the tool. What they hadn't done was checked, had that tool created something that made sense, and I think that's where it fell over, and I think the paper's now being retracted as a result. And also that the author is fully responsible for the accuracy of any information provided by the tool and for correctly referencing any supporting work on which that information depends. So again, this is why you can't use AI tools for a lot of this sort of publishing work. So this is obviously a new space, and I think new things are happening all the time. But it's worth keeping an eye on these guidelines that are published on the Wiley website. I guess as students, you're probably interested in how not only submitting your papers to a journal, but how you can become part of the publishing process. And Wiley has a really nice resource on their website, which is also accessible through the GEV and GEXPIRE websites, on how to become a peer reviewer. And it's got really nice explanations around what is peer review, how to undertake peer review, how to become a reviewer, what kind of recognition can you expect, and also some resources. So if you're interested in reviewing for journals, this is a really nice resource to go and take a look at. And if you're interested in becoming a reviewer for GEV or GEXPIRE, we welcome you to sort of send us your details, a bit of a snapshot about your experience, and if you could send it to Sarah Williams, who's the Executive Scientific Editor for both ISEP journals, we can consider adding your name to our pool of reviewers. So drop us a short email, and we could help you become part of the reviewing team. Obviously, you do need a little bit of publication experience to start doing this process. And if you haven't reviewed before, what I did when I was a student is I asked my supervisor, could I help review a paper? And he loved it because I was taking some of the work off him, but we got the journal to agree to a student helping to review the paper, and it was a great way of me learning how to review a paper and have my supervisor guide me through that process as well. So I think it's a great process to become part of. It helps you, even with your own work, on sort of trying to understand what components make a great paper, and actually it helps you understand what reviewers are saying when they're commenting on your own work as well. So I've just got a few points here on what I look for as an editor for both GEV and GEXPIRE. I'm looking for well-written manuscripts which are obviously within the scope of the journal, but also those that have the potential to advance the field and have some novelty. I think novelty is it doesn't need to be completely novel, because some replicative studies are very useful to have published, but I think it needs to bring something new to the table. And obviously, I love looking at manuscripts that are of really good quality and that I think the readership of the journal is going to be interested in reading. And I think that that's really why you have to try and find the best journal for your particular manuscript, because you want people to read it and understand it, and hopefully it's going to influence their own work as well. Also, I look for papers where the data is presented appropriately and not overinterpreted. And this happens sometimes where people can overinterpret omics data, for instance, without particular validation. And so it's quite easy to spot. So, this is something that quite often comes back in reviewers' comments. And also, you know, we want papers to have sufficient details that someone could go and repeat the experiments that you did. So also looking for sufficient details in the methodology to allow others to replicate your work. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm also looking for review articles which cover new ground and topics. So happy to receive any ideas if any of you have some cracking ideas for new review articles. So look, that's the end of the presentation. You can follow ICEV journals on Twitter or X. There's the handle ICEV_journals. Also remind you that ICEV 2024 is going to be here in Melbourne in May this year. We're going to have a Meet the Editor session, so you'll have an opportunity to meet the editorial boards for both journals at the meeting and to ask questions. So those of you coming to Melbourne, there'll be a session there just on the journals as well. And so with that, I'll thank you for listening and very happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Andy, thank you so much for this talk. It was very, very descriptive of like what both Jeff and JevXP is looking for. I'm going to read a few questions in the chat, but if you have a question that you would like to ask, you can just raise your hand or just pop it in the chat. So Natalie has a question. What happens if a reviewer agrees to review a manuscript but doesn't complete the review? Is there a length of time that the editors will wait before moving on to a different reviewer?
Look, that's a great question. And I think we also have to remember that reviewing is a sort of a voluntary activity. It's something you do on top of your day job usually. When we're going out to ask people to review, there's usually a week or 10-day period where we wait for the invitation to be accepted or declined. And so if we go out and ask a reviewer and they don't respond within that time period, they're just sent a very nice email to say, thanks, we'll move on to another reviewer. The problem sometimes is when someone agrees to review a manuscript, and we ask for our reviews to come back in 14 days, where they don't come back for 21, 28 days or longer. We do try and send prompts, and the system does send prompts to reviewers. And as editors, we're trying to keep an eye on those papers as well, where we're waiting for reviews. Sometimes if we have, if say I've sent out a paper to 4 reviewers who have agreed to review it, 3 of them have come back with their reviews, 1 of them is taking too long, I'll look at those reviews and go, look, if we can make a decision based on these 3 reviews, we will go with that. So there is a bit of a, have to take things on a bit of a case by case. But if you feel your paper is taking too long in the review process, and for the first period of review, I'd give it about 6 weeks before contacting the journal just to ask, you know, how's it all going with my paper? We do look into it, but you do have to give it a little bit of time. And I think sometimes of the year it can be really hard to find reviewers, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere summer. We find it can be really hard to get reviewers, and when we do, sometimes they take a longer period of time. So we do try and make things as speedy as we can, but yeah, and sometimes that does involve following up with reviewers.
All right, thank you, Andy. Next question is from Ash Brown. What happens if a reviewer shares the article and tries to copy the experiments in the lab?
Wow, I'd really hope that doesn't happen. You know, and I guess there's a real serious ethical issue with that kind of scenario. And I guess it's sort of, how could you prove something like that happens? And this is where sort of the editorial process might leach into something else. Yeah, I don't, to be honest, I don't have a really good answer for that question. I really hope it doesn't happen. But yeah, maybe someone here has experience of that, which is really unfortunate if it has happened.
Yeah, it's not a really nice thing to happen. Okay, next question from Sarah Hamed. How do you know what attracts the readers?
How do we know what attracts the readers? So I guess there's a little bit of crystal ball gazing of sort of guessing what we think people are going to like, but also you can look back at the being an open access journal that's on a website. We can look back at how many times a particular article's been viewed. And actually, when you have your own article published, there's a button you can press and it can tell you how many times your paper's been downloaded almost by month. So you can actually see how much attention your paper's got. And another way of getting attraction to your papers is to like use things like social media. So you see a lot of people tweeting, putting things on LinkedIn, which is fantastic. So sometimes it can be hard to know what attracts the readers. Sometimes we get a surprise that something really takes off that we wouldn't expect. But look, it's always good when you publish something just to track back yourself and just see how did you go with impact.
What about what ISEV thinks that will attract the readers, so people kind of know what they should submit? Because you mentioned something like you are always looking for things that the readers will want to read. So how can people kind of like have an idea of what ISEV, like Jev and JevXBio are looking for?
So I think papers that might have a new technique that you see and you go, wow, this is really going to change the field. And it's, it might have been applied, say, in a cancer model, but when we read it, we go, wow, you could use that in infectious disease, neurology, so you get an idea that it could be a new technique that really changes the field. So you'll pick up that people will find that really, really interesting. So yeah, there's things like that. So quite often it comes down to the technology, what the results are. So yeah, there's a lot of game-changing things that happen all the time and the field is evolving. So I think at the moment, most stuff's really interesting to someone. So yeah, I think it's, but it's those things that really stand out. And that's why we're really hoping to get JexBio indexed as soon as possible so we can track citations and things like that. And that'll give us an idea of what things are really, taking the field by storm.
Yeah. Okay, next question from Tu Nguyen. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. Thank you for your sharing. My team and I are currently in the process of drafting a narrative review on the EV with the intention of publishing it in JEV. However, as you said, many of the existing reviews already cover a wide range of aspects related to EV. Do you have any recommendations regarding specific aspects or angles that we could explore in our review to offer a fresh insight or perspective?
So I guess it's which particular area of EVs you're focusing on. And so you need to do a little bit of a scan of the literature to see what exists or what's already been published, in that particular area of EVs. And again, this is where talking to the editors before you submit the article, tell them I've got this idea. I think, I've had a look and no one's written a review on this particular aspect of EVs. And the editor might give you some ideas as well of things that you could cover. So I'd try and engage early on that particular point rather than sort of writing the whole thing and then sending it off although you could do that, but make the case in the cover letter that no one's ever done a review of this particular aspect before, which is why I think it's going to be suitable for JEV or JexBio.
Yeah. Okay, next question from Mohammed Salam. Does JEV accommodate the submission of articles under embargo due to intellectual property considerations? And if yes, what are the conditions?
Look, I haven't come across that yet in receiving papers. It's something we could certainly look into. I guess it depends on, your lawyers. I'm guessing this might be work that's undergoing patent examination or something, and whether, having it out to review might be viewed as public disclosure. I think I'd get an opinion on that before submitting the article for publication. However, I think patenting or protecting the intellectual property shouldn't interfere with you publishing that work as well. So I think it's good to have a chat with your intellectual property people at your university to develop a strategy for, I want to protect the intellectual property, but I also want to publish it. And usually you can find a way of doing both. So I don't like hearing from people that say, I'm trying to patent this so I can never publish it, because I think you can do both. And it's just good to get some advice. And I think, again, that's on a bit of a case-by-case basis as to what you might disclose in the paper that allows the science to come out, but what you protect in terms of the intellectual property. So, yeah, I think that's a great discussion to have with your intellectual property team at the university.
Thank you, Wendy. Next question from Afsarin Bano. Thank you for your wonderful session stuffed with interesting knowledge on publishing on ISEV journals. I'll definitely love to be a reviewer in these esteemed journals. The question is, if a manuscript got rejected, is it possible to resubmit after adding more data and information?
Look, yes, we've had a few articles that have done that. You know, I think when you get the reviewers' comments back, you know, do look at what they're saying, because a lot of the time, most people are seeing the same issues with a particular paper. So if it is a case of, look, you need to get your N numbers up, or you need to do this little bit of work to get it over the line, we would look at a resubmission. And sometimes when we're rejecting a paper, it's done on the basis of, look, we think it's going to take you 3 to 6 months to do more experimental work, and it's probably better that we don't leave you hanging on with the possibility of it being rejected in 3 or 6 months' time, to reject it now. And sometimes we do tell authors, we're rejecting this, but we'd like, you know, if you'd like to resubmit it, we consider it as well. So if you do get a rejection, you can go back to the editor and go, look, if we did this, this, and this, would you reconsider a resubmission? And you'll get an answer that way as well. Just be aware, though, that when you resubmit the paper, it might not go to the same reviewers. Sometimes we try to get it to the same reviewers, but they might be unavailable or unwilling to look at the paper again. So you might get the paper back with a few other issues that are brought up. So just be aware of that. But I suggest, if you've got a paper that you think is strong enough, it has been rejected, go back to the editor and just say, look, if we did this and this, would you consider a resubmission? And, you know, it's always good to ask.
Thank you, Wendy. I kind of have a follow-up question on that. You did mention that you reject quite a few papers from the JEV. What would you say is the main reason that papers get rejected? Is it like lack of N numbers? Is it not well restructured? Is it not good isolation methods? What would you say is like the major reason for rejection?
Look, I can't speak on behalf of the editor-in-chief there, but I think it's really about papers that might not fit that brief of being applicable to a broad audience. That's usually so it could be a very specific disease with a very specific you know, set of experiments that only people that work on that particular disease would be interested in. That wouldn't fly at JEV. Things like the N numbers or over-interpreting data, that's another reason. That normally kind of gets drawn out when the paper's actually undergone review. But I'd say for the desk rejection, it's usually around, is this going to be of broad enough interest for the readership of the journal? Or is it bringing something really, really new to the table that we think is going to grab people's attention?
All right, thank you. Natalie, you have raised your hand for quite a while. You can ask your question, and then I'll read a few more from the chat. We still have a few minutes.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So, Andy, I found it really interesting that you were saying that JEV would consider publishing negative results if they were of great enough interest. So things like your clinical studies and things like that. So I assume it would be the same for JEXBio then. If it's of great enough interest, you might also consider publishing negative results in JEXBio.
Sure, and look, sometimes we think of things as negative results because things didn't turn out perhaps as we planned them. But I actually think that's a positive result. And if the experiments have been carried out, you know, rigorously, the data is what the data is. That's your story. And if it is a negative result, it can actually be turned into a positive. And it actually makes a really big contribution to the field. It might stop a lot of people doing particular experiments because they're never going to work. So yeah, I try not to think of things as negative data. It's it's data, and I've got I've got a story to tell. I've done all the experiments properly, and so I think in terms of clinical trials, it is important to publish things where you haven't had a positive clinical outcome, because again, that could stop a lot of other clinical trials in a similar area from taking place, which you might think is not ethical if you're continuing to do something that is known not to have an effect.
Yeah, I guess that was my follow-up question. Like, obviously there are negative results, but then there are just results that didn't work because maybe the experiments weren't carried out to the best of their ability. So what level of validation would be expected to then publish negative results? Like, would you have to have X number of technical repeats of the experiment, or show in multiple ways that the experiment didn't work? Like, how would you address that, so we're not just putting results out there that didn't work because they weren't done properly?
Yeah, I think sometimes you raise a really good point. Sometimes you do need to go a bit extra into showing why something hadn't worked. But I think if you're setting up proper experiments with appropriate controls, I think you can almost answer the question in that way. No one wants to see a Western blot with absolutely no bands on it and someone says such and such protein isn't there. You need a positive control on there. And, it's that old saying, is it absence of evidence isn't the same as evidence of absence. Put the film on for a bit longer, you might have seen a band coming up. So that would be an example of not really convincing someone that it's a negative result. You need to have, say, a positive control on there as well. So yeah, it's an interesting question, but I still think there's a lot of value in publishing these things, and they can have really big impacts in the field as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Natalie. I think I'll have time for one more question, someone that hasn't asked anything before. Alexandra says, thank you so much for your presentation. I am doing my master's working with urinary EVs. I want to make sure that my thesis will result in an article. What do you recommend me doing to make sure I can publish my thesis results on JEV or JXBio?
So I talk to your supervisor and let them know your ambition. I want to publish my work. And I think it's about making sure that every experiment you do, that could be the experiment that goes into the paper. So, every Western blot you do, every qPCR, make sure it's very well controlled, because that's the one that could end up in the paper. So I think it's about doing quality work, answering an important research question. And I think if you sat with your supervisor and sort of mapped out what a paper could look like, that's sometimes a good strategy to, to get some of your work published. And, it can be quite challenging to try and publish something out of a master's thesis, because you've only got a set amount of time. But, both JEV and JXBio publish short communications, 3 figures or so. That could be a great vehicle to get some of your work published as well. So yeah, good luck with that.
Thank you, Wendy. Well, we are at time now, so thank you everyone for coming to the talk, and thank you so much, Andy, for giving us your time, telling us the difference between JEV and JXBio. I think it was very helpful, and many people are interested in this talk. So thank you, everyone. Keep following SNEV, and we'll put together more talks. And yeah, if you have anything to publish, go talk with the editors, maybe contact Andy. And yeah, see you next time, and thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
See you in Melbourne. See you.
Bye. See you.
Bye.